I know this statement is going to sound general as fuck to say, but this episode is about life. There's no simpler way to say it. Because there's giving life, there's taking life, there's enjoying life, and there's wanting people to be in your life or not wanting them to be in your life. Because that's literally everything that I'm talking about in this episode, which is a little bit wild. Almost seems planned, which it actually isn't. But, I kind of like it when the themes kind of coincide together like this, because it just kind of makes my job a little bit easier in terms of explaining it in this first portion. But another thing that does make it particularly interesting for me to explain in the first portion is some of the more interesting news, of which I have one here from India, where a man who was pronounced dead came back to life. Like, normally this is some shit that we'd expect in like a Nigerian movie or some horror story, but no, this is actual reality in India. The only part about it that I found to be particularly interesting is the circumstances as to how the guy ended up coming back to life. Because the man was pronounced dead and he came back to life after, get this, an ambulance hit a large pothole. Now, you'd have to be particularly wild to want to use a story like this to your advantage and promote a product, but I can see how this has potential benefits. Because when you kind of think about it, regardless of the size of the hole, someone's soul was saved. So, if you were a hoe, get my point?
The royal penis is clean, Your Highness.
Like, I'm trying to think about how I'd explain this to, like, my family if I was the guy that died. Granted, the man was a particularly old guy, he was like 80 years old. But imagine if this guy was getting home right after the wife had gone to claim the life insurance money and she was busy rejoicing and shit. And she's like, oh shit, this nigga dead, but now I got money. And then all of a sudden, like, dude is just, like, looking at her after he's checked into the door as she's busy trying to shake her butt, trying to think about what her retired ass is going to do with that money. Like, it would be particularly odd seeing that happen. But anyways, let me not speculate too much about what would have happened. Would this guy have died? Let me just read the story that came with this entire thing. So it says, and I quote, in a miraculous incident in Haryana, an 80-year-old man declared dead by doctors came back to life after his ambulance hit a pothole. Darshan Singh Brar, being transported from Patiala to Karnal, was thought dead by his relatives who had gathered for his funeral. However, in the ambulance, his grandson noticed movement in Brar's hand. Confirming he had a heartbeat, they rushed him to the nearest hospital where doctors declared him alive. Brar's previous hospitalization involved being on a ventilator for 4 days before being pronounced dead, raising questions about the earlier diagnosis. End quote. Okay, so I'm trying to think about this. Like, if we were to use this story for a slogan that would enable the road company to not have to fix that pothole, like, I feel like the number of options wouldn't be that many, but they'd be particularly good. Because you think about it. Thick dive saves lives, big hole saves souls. Like, that shit would work so bloody well for the road company to not have to fix shit. Like, that pothole would be considered the life-saving pothole. And if there's a bunch of water after it's rained, it could have even been called the Fountain of Youth for because the thought of it, like, this guy could have been killed or revived by anything else. But a pothole, that is the most unsuspecting thing ever. Now imagine the number of prostitutes that can use this shit to their advantage. It doesn't matter the size of the hole, but best believe the moment I sit on it, it's either I'm taking your soul or I'm giving it back to you. You just have to pay me right. Or they can start a full-on GoFundMe campaign and say that a hole a day keeps death away. Like, think of the kind of funding that they'd get after saying such shit and talking about how just because an old 80-year-old man who was thought to be dead landed on a hole and he was revived, imagine how many other people's lives we can save with a hole. Like, this shit would work so well. It's just that I don't think prostitutes have marketing campaigns, and this shit would not work well for the road company. So I'm just going to leave it here and take my very creative brain back to doing the podcast, which I should have started in a less deadly way with a little bit more soul in my hole, by saying, welcome to the Breakdown Podcast, where I talk about love, sex, and relationships from a guy's perspective, as well as a bunch of other guy shit. The man on the mic is a man who believes that the hole is not the savior of the soul. Because regardless of the hole, it's the bumps that we like to hump. Or whatever the fuck that's supposed to mean. He's a man who likes his women the same exact way he likes his yogurt. It is none other than your tall, dark, and mildly handsome man, Sir Denver B. This show has started in a less sexual but slightly more sexual way than we had expected, or at least than I had expected. And I'm actually not feeling too bad about that shit. I haven't made a sex joke in a while. Okay, granted, a while was the last episode, which was like a couple of days ago, but all in all, I feel like, if you have a good one, you might as well throw it in there. And in this particular case, if you're an R&B fan, this is finally your justification to cheat, because unlike Boys to Men, you just won't make it till the end of the road, because you'll be stuck dealing with potholes, and some of them might actually save your soul. But all in all, welcome to the podcast. I hope that you've been listening since the beginning. I hope you enjoy the entire episode and you listen till the end. And if you are enjoying it, then you can give your feedback via social media. The handles are usually below. And as usual, if you are listening through some app that allows for ratings and reviews, a nice rating and or review would be highly appreciated. Now, this episode, because it's a Friday episode, does involve us going into the internet and pulling a couple of tweets, because those are the opinions that you put out there, and we like to critique some of them. Or at least I do. And you can be a contributor in the making of these episodes by sending in the different tweets that you feel we should discuss. And the drill on how to do it is particularly simple, regardless of whether it's Facebook, IG, or X. And I will explain that in a second, because it almost sounds like a song and it goes like this. You see that tweet, you like that tweet, you want us to discuss that tweet, you send that tweet. You send it to the DMs of @BugakaTheD, which is my personal X handle, and I will take it from there and handle it accordingly. On Facebook and on IG, if it happens to be a screenshot, a screen grab, or ended up on a reel, then the place to send it to on Facebook is @TheBreaktime_podcast, and on IG it is @TheBreaktime_podcast, and I will take it from there and I will handle it accordingly. Now, I do have a couple of tweets that I need to get into, but before I can do that, we need to discuss something that I have been trying to avoid for the past couple of weeks, because it has been trending on Kenyan social media, it's been trending online, hell, it's been making its way into the news, and I just have been finding it very, very hard to avoid these conversations. And it's the topic of femicide. And to be very honest, I don't think people understand how much I've been avoiding having these conversations. Not necessarily because I don't think they're relevant or it's an important conversation to have. I definitely have my reasons for it. But to kind of give a pretty good context, I've only had the whole discussion on femicide with I think one person, maybe two at the most. And the rest of the time I've been preferring to shut the fuck up. Just mostly because I feel like if there's a time when it's most convenient for you to shut the fuck up as a guy, it's now. Not because, we don't understand or you don't have anything to say. It's mostly just because a lot of times any difference in opinion will just label you as a misogynist or, particularly insensitive or some version of hate speech towards women. But unfortunately, it seems like not every guy shares the same sentiments and belief systems that I do. And it was sort of very well shown after the women's march that was done this past weekend, when one of the rappers from the Wakadinale music group known as Ska Mkadinale decided to come out and write on his stories one of the most polarizing yet least intelligent statement that he has made online in quite a while. Now, this guy decided to write, and this was after the women's march. He said, and I quote, "One way of reducing femicide is by advising our women to get married by the age of 23 years. Married women rarely go to Airbnbs and clubs. This is not rocket science. Come on." End quote. And the thing is, this is a pretty good example of something that me and a couple of other people have said, where we believe that just because you're a public figure doesn't mean that you should have an opinion on everything, and just because you have an opinion or just because you're a public figure doesn't mean that you need to voice it publicly for the entire world to see. I think to a certain degree this statement was supposed to be controversial and sort of stand with the guys or some shit, or make it seem like he has this very, very smart idea on things. The only thing is, if the guy actually did a very, very small amount of research or kept up with the news, he'd realize that if there was a time when saying such a thing was bad, it was when he said it. Because the recent statistics on women who've been killed, and this is I think over the past 6-7 years or some shit like that, apparently the largest number of murders were actually perpetrated by the husband of the woman who was killed. Like, out of the 500 deaths that happened, out of the 500 and something deaths, 241 of them were carried out by the husband. Let me repeat that again. Out of over 542 deaths, if I'm not wrong, 241 of them were carried out by the husband, which is the highest number out of the entire stat. The next largest batch of perpetrators were actually the boyfriends, who had a little over half the number that the husbands had at 130, before we got to the strangers who were at 99. So in other words, the people who had the closest, most intimate form of contact with these women were the ones that were the most likely to actually end these women's lives. And you have the nerve to step out and say that the way to reduce femicide in the country is to get most of the women to get married by the age of 23? Like, this is probably the most counterintuitive statement ever. And granted, even I didn't know these stats up until I saw him like post up all of this shit. But even then, like, the whole Airbnb thing was like 2 cases out of like the publicized on TV, like 5 or 6, if not 7 women who were killed. And the rest, I think, save for like maybe 1 or 2 of them, were actually people who were being killed by a disgruntled ex-boyfriend or some version of a partner that they used to be with or they were presently with. So you're telling me that the best way to solve this shit, at least by your estimation, is by getting these women to marry earlier? Like, if anything, it's like you're dooming them, or you had zero idea of this shit. Which is why, honestly speaking, I think public figures need to stick to what makes them public figures. They don't necessarily need to give opinions on shit like this. Granted, it's not like he was asked, but honestly, if you're not someone who's knowledgeable in this entire thing, for the most part, just back the fuck off. There's nothing wrong with accepting, I don't know enough about this shit, or I'm not a fan of it, so I'm just gonna leave it alone. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. But making a random, unbased, uninformed statement like what the guy just did is controversial at best, pointless most of the time. And to be very honest, if guys who are more well versed in such topics, if I myself, who speaks on relationships, have chosen to shut the fuck up about the entire thing, then maybe it's because there's something that we know or something that we don't know that we'd much rather ensure that we can keep quiet about, But then again, maybe it's just me, and granted, he probably doesn't listen to this podcast, so I'll just leave it at that and move it on to the tweets of this episode. So, on to our very first tweet of this episode. Now, the tweet was sent by a woman who stated, and I quote, "A girl on TikTok said how she was unhappy with her job and wanted something more, so she called her boyfriend about it. Next thing she knows, she's at work and he calls her, tells her to clock out, had movers at her apartment moving her to Dallas with him, paid the fee to break her lease and everything, LOL. He told her the only thing he expects from her is to find her passion in life. Don't worry about cooking, cleaning, none of that. Just do what you love and I'll make sure you're happy. That's God's favorite dog." And before the men get upset, she's also advised that she has a nice ass savings account and 2 degrees. She'll be alright. End quote. Okay. I know some people would speak against this. I know some guys are against this entire idea. Of course, just about every woman who'd hear such a thing would be extremely happy. And I'll just be the one guy, if not among many, to come out and say this. But honestly, I wish I could do that for someone I love. Just the same way I believe that this is something that a lot of guys, if they had the capability to do so, would do that for someone that they love. Because as guys, we know the kind of struggles that we're supposed to go through, and we've accepted the fact, or at least a good chunk of us have accepted the fact that we have to go through struggles to make life easier for our people. So if we find a situation where someone close to us, someone that we love and care about, can actually achieve something that they'd want to do, follow a passion, and not have to go through the hustle and bustle of like the daily struggles, and we can make that shit happen, like, we'll do it. We'll most definitely do it. because we know the passions that we have and the fact that we've probably had to make sacrifices so that we can actually get to where we are, or we make sacrifices for the good of ensuring that there's a good amount of sustenance or financial stability or some shit, so that the next person that we have that's close to us, whether it's our wife, our partner, our kids, doesn't have to go through the same issues that I'm going through, so that they themselves can concentrate on something that they're passionate about and most definitely chase their passions. Now, of course, the reality of it is there's not that many people that would actually be particularly good with this kind of, freedom and win, because of course there's a lot of people that can be passionate about one thing and then they forget that when you have a passion for something, the moment you start working on it, after a while it stops being about the passion and there's a certain amount of discipline that's there. And there's a lot of people that could sort of like fuck up and not really be able to go that far because they got into something because it was fun, and once the funds ran out, there's no life in it, or now they suddenly have to start doing more than just the passion that they're doing, aka they start doing more of managing the people who are pursuing the passion so that they can make the passion work. And that can make some people flip-flop around different things and can just make them not as useful or not as passionate. But all in all, if you can do this for your partner and you manage to make it work, or you can even do it for your kids if you have them, and it's something that's very possible for you to still do and still be particularly financially comfortable, then by all means do it, because you have one life, you're going through all of that struggle. Like, what's it for if not to benefit those around you as well as yourself? But then again, I might be wrong about this entire thing, but I'm going to leave it at that and move it on to the next tweet of this episode. Now, this one was sort of an open discussion that was asked, and it was asked by a woman who said, and I quote, "Open discussion. Why do men hold on to women they don't want a relationship with?" End quote. Now, to be very honest, when I read this, I kind of felt like I was going to give one answer, but I realized that there's a couple of them, of which I think the most major answer I'll just save for last, which is like the simplest, most general answer for the most part. But the reason why a lot of men will hold on to women that they don't want a relationship with sometimes will stem from the fact that they just don't want to be the person to break their hearts. Like, you find that there's a babe who's head over heels for you, or she really has the feels for you. You're not entirely interested in her, but it's not like you want to break her heart, or you guys started having a thing, but you automatically feel after a bit of time that she's not the one for you. But you're finding it hard to break things off because you know the kind of pain that you will cause her, and you don't want to do that because you don't want to be the bad guy. You're only doing it because you want, better for you, but at the same time, it just means that you'll be leaving her in pain and it's not nice, blah, blah, blah. So some guys end up keeping a babe around even though they're not entirely interested in them for this particular reason. There's also other guys that will do it because they like the female attention and they can use that female attention to get more women with them. Like, it also kind of works in a strategic kind of way. But at the same time, you could also argue that it's more or less the same thing that women will do when it comes to putting guys in the friend zone. This whole thing of, this guy really, really wants to be with you. He really wants you, but you're not interested in him. And, in as much as you're not interested in him, you're not letting him bang, you're not doing anything intimate with him. You're just complaining about all the other guys that you're banging, and you're asking him to do stuff for you that you probably would expect your boyfriend to do for you or someone close to you, and this guy gets zero benefits. And then all of a sudden you get pissed off the moment he gets a babe, and then there's fusses and fights and shit between you, him, and his girlfriend, blah, blah, blah. But anyways, that's sort of besides the point. Like, for the most part, there are guys that will, try and have a babe with them so that they can pull another babe. And it actually works. It's not a bad strategy. It's just not that good in terms of caring about the other person. But I think the most general explanation as to why it is men will hold on to women that they don't want a relationship with is pussy. Like, it's as simple as that. Pussy. It is the most convenient sex that we'll get. Let me put it that way. Not necessarily that it's convenient in that it's easy or that it's going to be easily given to us. It's mostly from a case where we know the baby's interested in us, so we know that it's not going to be as hard to convince her to sleep with us. So we might as well keep the babe that we know is going to give us the pussy, as opposed to dropping her and saying, you know what, I can't do it with you because this isn't going to turn into a relationship. And I know that's what you want, but I can't give you that, blah, blah, blah. Most times guys will much rather just get the pussy and just keep quiet about the thing and not have that conversation up until she gets fed up, and then she has to have that conversation. Then you say that you can't commit, which is something that a lot of guys do, and it's not the best thing possible. But you know what? It is what it is. It's an unfortunate side of being a guy and being a babe that's interested in a guy who isn't interested in you. But you know, hopefully if you are in that situation, you manage to get out and you find a much better relationship for you. But either way, I am going to leave it at that and move it on to the next tweet of this episode. And the final tweet of this episode says, and I quote, "Men, lastly, do not attempt to moan. Moaning is a psychological tool women use to test your frame. Do not attempt to ejaculate. Practice dry orgasm. Orgasm and ejaculation are not the same. Postpone the ejaculation and control your breathing." End quote. Alright, so considering that these are the words that are said by none other than the Twitter influencer known as Amerix, I would like to come out and state that I do not think that 90% of this shit is particularly good advice. Now, the whole, don't ejaculate, and like make sure you orgasm but you don't ejaculate, and you make sure you postpone the ejaculation and control your breathing. Like, a lot of this shit is, the whole version of coitus interruptus, or, the whole, make sure you don't come when you bang a babe, which is a belief that a lot of people have held over the past years on how, ejaculation will kind of kill the strength of a man. Steve Jobs believed that it was the key to how he preserved his creativity and had so much of it. The whole coitus interruptus, making sure that, you stop having sex the moment you're just about to ejaculate so you don't do it. And it was a belief system that, well, it is a belief system that a lot of people believe. I think even to some degree the nofap community believes is a way to keep your masculinity and like protect yourself in a particularly good way. But for the most part, I'd argue that it's mostly bullshit. Well, I can't say for sure that, it'll affect your creativity or strength, but I know that because a lot of people would feel weaker or would fall asleep after sex and would feel particularly lazy and unmotivated afterwards, it did kind of push a lot of people to have these beliefs of, if you ejaculate, you lose your creativity or you lose your strength. But the reality of it is that's not in any way related to ejaculation. Of course, yes, you can feel sleepier afterwards, you can feel more tired, but that is something that you can actually train out if you actually practice it a little bit. And for the most part, this is what we refer to as pseudoscience, because it's not really backed up on anything that is actually scientific. Then the whole do not attempt to moan thing, to be honest, this one is a bit of a mixed bag. Some people say, you shouldn't moan, or you should, but the way I looked at it was, I didn't look at it as like some shit test from women. I decided to look at it from a point of validation and communication. Actually, communication more so than validation, because I remember having this conversation like 6-7 years ago with a couple of my female friends, and I asked them if they like it if guys moan. And what one of them said has always stuck with me, because I always used to think, don't make noise, just go and do it, make sure she moans, but you shouldn't. And her reply to the entire thing was, like, whenever you're having sex with a woman, why do you want her to moan? And I was like, it kind of shows that I'm doing the job right. And, it's a pretty good thing because it shows that she's enjoying it. And, it kind of does boost my confidence. And she was like, so don't you think the same thing will happen for us? Because we also want you to enjoy the sex that you're having. We want you to enjoy it as well. And what better way to do it than to moan? Because that's the communication that we need. Yes, you can come, but that's like at the end. But how will we know that we're doing a good thing any time between the moment you start and the moment you finish, besides you actually moaning? And when I thought about it, it kind of made sense. The whole dirty talk, the whole saying that you like it and everything, it actually made sense. It's not just for the babe to say, it's also for the guy. Because if a babe is like, I don't like a guy who moans, then maybe that's a her thing. But last I checked, there's a lot of women that love the reassurance that they're making a guy feel pleasured with whatever it is that they are doing. And the sex isn't just this, detached, objectified thing that the guy did with her body just a nut, and he doesn't give a shit. Like, at the end of the day, they also want to know that they're doing a pretty good job. So the whole, it's a psychological tool women use to test your frame, I don't think it's a psychological test. I honestly think if you guys actually do care about each other and you like being intimate with each other, the reassurance of moaning is good regardless of gender. Although then again, I could be wrong about this shit, just the same way I could be wrong about so many other things, so I want your thoughts on it. The DMs are open. On X it is at Bagaka the D, on Facebook it is at The Break Time Podcast, and on IG it is at The Break Time _podcast. Thank you so much for listening all the way till the end, and I will catch you guys on the next break.
But what I believe is that if you put a pastor and a prostitute in one room, one is likely to convert the other.